Here we go with our first chapter of class 9. That is French Revolution. So let's start with this chapter. In this chapter, basically we read about French society and its structure, all the social crisis which held in France, how Louis XVI became the king, all about meetings of Estate Journal. The Third Estate declared itself a National Assembly, tennis court oath, storming of the Bastille, abolition of feudal privileges, declaration of rights of man and citizen, and the constitution became a constitutional monarchy. When monarchy was abolished in France, became a republic. How Robespierre was executed, how reign of terror began, how directory came to power. We are going to read all about these in this chapter. So let's start with this chapter with our French society during the late 18th century. In the 18th century, French society was basically comprised of the First Estate, the Third Estate, and the Second Estate. In these three estates, in the First Estate, we talk about clergy. Clergy were the people who paid no taxes. Whereas nobility were also the people who also paid no taxes. And in the Third Estate, they were comprised of all the common people like peasants, workers, middle class, all the middle class people such as big businessmen, merchants, court officials, peasants, artisans, landless laborers, and servants. And this Third Estate paid all the taxes and had no political rights. They had no political rights, they paid all the taxes related to the money. Now, further, we talk about some within the Third Estate. Some were very rich and some were very poor. We know how they were rich because some were big businessmen, merchants, court officials, whereas some were peasants, artisans, landless laborers. Then we talk about the burden of financing activities of state through taxes was borne by the Third Estate alone. Here we get to know about that all the taxes were paid by Third Estate alone. First and Second Estate were exempted from paying the taxes. That is why this resulted in some political, social, and economic causes for French Revolution. So now, what was the political cause for French Revolution? If we talk about political cause, there was absolute monarchy, there was no voting right for common people. And when we talk about social causes, there were privileges for clergy and nobility, and inequality in society. And when we talk about economic causes, there were heavy taxes which were only borne by Third Estate, rising prices of bread. France was in debt due to wars. Now, there was also some intellectual causes of the French Revolution, which were ideas of equality, liberty, and democracy, and influence of philosophers like Rousseau and Montesquieu, which we will read further in this chapter. Now, the struggle for survival. Now, people need to survive, and they did some struggle to survive. That is, population of France grew, and so did the demand for grain. From 1750 to 1800, population grew drastically in France, and so that with that only grain demand, food demand also increased. This resulted a gap between rich and poor, and this led to subsistence crisis. Subsistence crisis is a situation where population grows and there's a lot of demand for grain, and there's a lot of gap between rich and poor, and this leads to a subsistence crisis where there is a struggle for survival. Now we read about growing the middle class. Now, to overcome this struggle, middle class need to grow and they have to fight for their rights. So the growing middle class. The third estate. The third estate was educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. We all know that third estate was educated, and as they were educated, they knew the meaning of equality, and they showed the society that privilege by birth should be not given to anyone. So these ideas were put forward by some philosophers such as Locke, who was English philosopher, and Rousseau, who was a French philosopher. So this is an important point that Locke was an English philosopher and Rousseau was a French philosopher. And the American Constitution and its guarantee of individual rights was an important example for political theories of France. So now, which example did Rousseau and Locke give to the first and second estate and the king of France? That was the example of an American Constitution which guarantees individual rights, and political theories of France should be improved as in case of this example. Now, these ideas were discussed intensively in salons and coffee houses and spread among people through books, newspapers, and these were even read aloud. So how did these ideas spread? These ideas were discussed by peoples locally and all, and like that these ideas spread all over the country. Now we talk about the role of Estates Journal. King Louis XVI called Estate Journals meeting to discuss about taxes, and in there voting was unfair. One vote was given per estate. This is also an important point, that one vote was given to one estate, and this was an unfair manner, as first and second estate were happy as they have to give no vote, and third estate was just born for taxes. That is why third estate demanded one vote per head. Third estate demanded one vote per head, and this demand was rejected by Louis XVI, and therefore after this meeting a National Assembly was formed. National Assembly was formed. Now, for National Assembly, a tennis court oath was held, where members of the third estate took an oath. In tennis court oath, all the members were from third estate. They took an oath. They promised that they will not disperse until a constitution was made. They told that they will not move from their places unless and until a constitution is made and equality and equal rights are given to all. So this was their demand, and it showed unity and determination among people. So what it gave rise to? It gave rise to unity and determination. Nation. From here onwards, this tennis oath led to Bastille storming of Bastille, lead to Bastille incident. So how it led to Bastille incident? Let's read about that also. So Bastille was a symbol of royal power. We all know Bastille was a symbol of royal power. People attacked it on 14th July 1789 because they thought that armed forces are going to burst into the nation. This Bastille event, mentioned in the first page of this chapter or the book of your class 9 history, led to the beginning of the revolution. It was the beginning of revolution. So now next comes the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. This is also an important point. Rights of man and citizen. So one thing you will notice is here there's only men. There's no woman mentioned. So this resulted in discrimination also. But once we will read about this. So how key rights declared? Right to equality. Some declaration of man and citizen rights were declared, such as right to equality before law, right to equality before law. Second, freedom of speech. And expression. Next was right to life. And right to resist oppression. And one right was also the right to resist oppression. This is an right which is not at all discussed in this chapter, but this is also an important right. It is an extra point for you to score in exams. The right to resist oppression was also a part of the rights given in right to man and citizen. So first right was right of equality before law, right of freedom of speech and expression, right to life, and right to resist oppression. Next, in this chapter we talk about constitution of 1791. In constitution came in 1791. What it did, it limited the power of king. This constitution limited the power of king. Further, it divided the powers among legislature, executive, and judiciary. These were the three power distribution held in Constitution of 1791, and in Constitution of 1791, France became a constitutional monarchy. France became a constitutional monarchy. Now, how did abolition of monarchy and republic happen? How? Abolition of monarchy and republic. How did abolished monarchy and republic? We will read about this. So, first king tried to escape and lost people trust as there was lost treasury, empty treasury when Louis XVI became king. So he tried to escape. And when he tried to escape, he lost people's trust. This led to the abolition of monarchy and republic. And one more point, that monarchy and was abolished in 1792. monarchy abolish हुई थी 1792 में. Now we'll talk about reign of terror in this chapter. In reign of terror, this period was between 1793 to 94. This was led by Robespierre. Thousands of people were executed. Thousands of people were executed, and there were strict laws and punishments. So now how did this revolution got an end? We will read about this in chapter. First, Robespierre was executed. Then Directory came into power. Then revolution ended, but ideas of liberty. So this is how revolution ended, and some ideas like liberty and equality were spread worldwide. This is what French Revolution led to: ideas of liberty, equality, and some ideas of fraternity also. Fraternity means brotherhood. So this was the overview of this chapter. Now let's talk about the outbreak of revolution. So the French Revolution went through various stages, which we talk about in the overview. When Louis XVI became the king of France in 1774, this is an important topic. In 1774, Louis XVI king बना था, and he got an empty treasury. Empty treasury. He inherited treasury which was empty. There was growing discontent within the society of the old regime. So old regime the society थी वो थी 1774 से पहले वाली सोसाइटी जो ओल्ड रेजिम का कहती थी, और उसमें बहुत ज़्यादा डिसकंटेंट आ गए थे, यानी डिससेटिस्फैक्शन, जिसकी वजह से लोगों को किंग पे ट्रस्ट नहीं था. और 1789 में क्या हुआ? कॉन्वोकेशन हुई थी एस्टेट जनरल की. द थर्ड एस्टेट फॉर्म्स द नेशनल असेंबली. 1789 में एस्टेट जनरल की मीटिंग आई, फिर एस्टेट नेशनल असेंबली बनी, और बेस्टाइल भी स्टॉर्म हुआ 1789 में. और पीजेंट्स की रिवोल्ट हुई कंट्री साइड पे. क्यों? क्योंकि ग्रेन नहीं था, खाना नहीं था. और इसी साल में क्या आई थी? सबसिस्टेंस क्राइसिस. This was all about 1789. Now, in 1791, a constitution was formed which framed to the limit of the powers of the king and guaranteed some basic rights to all human beings. And these rights were the rights which we talked about, such as right to life, right to equality before law, and right to speech and expression, and right which resist against oppression. Now in 1790 to 1793, France becomes a republic. So when France became a republic? In 1792. And Jacobin Republic overthrown, a directive rules forms. और 1792 to 1793 जो जैकोबिन रॉबेस्फियर की जो गवर्नमेंट थी वो रिपब्लिक को ओवरथ्रो करती है और एक डायरेक्टरी फॉर्म करती है. फिर 1795 में फिर एक नई कन्वेंशन अपॉइंट होती है जिसमें 5 मैन होते हैं डायरेक्टरेट के जो रन करते हैं स्टेट को. और 26 अक्टूबर 1795 में फॉर्म हुई थी. 26 अक्टूबर इज़ एन इम्पॉर्टेंट डेट. फिर 1799 पे द रिवॉल्यूशन एंड हो जाती है और राइज होता है नेपोलियन बोनापार्टे का. 1799 में राइज होता है और 1804 में वो भी मर जाता है. अब हम आगे पढ़ते हैं. टाइमलाइन क्या थी फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन की? 1770 टू 1780 इकोनॉमिक डिक्लाइन आया था. फ्रेंच गवर्नमेंट वाज इन डेप्थ. 1788 टू 1789 बहुत गंदी हार्वेस्ट हुई थी, हाई प्राइस हो गए थे फूड रिवॉर्ड्स के, जिसकी वजह से लोग क्या करने लग गए थे? स्टॉर्म करने लग गए थे और सबसिस्टेंस क्राइसिस आई थी. फिर 1789 5 मई को एस्टेट जनरल की मीटिंग आई थी और जो डिमांड करी थी रिफॉर्म कैसे? वोटिंग राइट के, वोटिंग राइट पर हेड. पर हेड। फिर 1789 जुलाई 14 नेशनल असेंबली फॉर्म हुई थी और बेस्टाइल को भी स्टॉर्म करा था इसी दिन जुलाई 14 को, और फ्रेंच रिवॉल्यूशन यहीं से स्टार्ट होती है। उसके बाद 1789 अगस्त 4 की रात को राइट्स जो थे एरिस्टोक्रेसी के वो एंड हो जाते हैं। फिर 1789 अगस्त 26 को डिक्लेरेशन ऑफ राइट्स ऑफ मैन आया था। 1790 में सिविल कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ क्लर्जी नेशनलाइजेस चर्च नेशनलाइज हो जाते हैं, बैंक्स भी नेशनलाइज हो जाती है, अप्रैल थीसिस के अकॉर्डिंग था ये। और कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ 1791 कन्वर्ट्स एब्सोल्यूट मोनार्की इनटू अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मोनार्की एंड लिमिट्स विद इन द पावर। 1792 में ऑस्ट्रिया और प्रूसिया अटैक कर देते हैं रिवॉल्यूशनरी फ्रांस को। 1793 में लुईस 16 और मैरी एंटोनिएट उसकी वाइफ एग्जीक्यूट हो जाती है। उसके बाद हम बात करते हैं 1792 टू 1794, जिस पीरियड ऑफ टाइम में रेन ऑफ टेरर स्टार्ट हो जाते हैं। ऑस्ट्रिया, ब्रिटेन, द नीदरलैंड, प्रूसिया एंड द स्पेन, और ये सब वॉर पे होते हैं इस टाइम। रॉबेस्पियर कमिटीज़ ऑफ पब्लिक सेफ्टी रिपेल्स बैक फ्रॉम फॉरेन इन्वेडर्स, वो वॉर से पीछे हट जाते हैं और वो एग्जीक्यूट कर देते हैं बहुत सारे मैनी एनिमीज ऑफ द पीपल ऑफ द फ्रांस इटसेल्फ। 1794 में रॉबेस्पियर खुद एग्जीक्यूट हो जाते हैं और फ्रांस में एक डायरेक्टरी आ जाती है। जो एक डायरेक्टरी क्या होती है? डायरेक्टरी एक कमेटी होती है 5 पीपल की। उसके बाद 1799 में नेपोलियन बोनापार्टी लीडर बन जाता है। इसके बाद हम वुमेन्स की रिवॉल्यूशन की बात करते हैं। फ्रॉम द वेरी बिगिनिंग वुमेन वर द एक्टिव participants in the events which were brought about so many changes in the French society, and most women were of the third estate who had to do work for their livings, and their wages were lower than those of men's. So this is an important point, that their wages were lower than those of men. Then we talk about, in order to discuss the voice and their interest, women started their own political clubs and newspapers, जिससे उनकी बातें सुनी जाए। उन्होंने political clubs और newspapers शुरू कर दिए थे खुद के। One of their main demands was that women's को भी same political rights मिलने चाहिए as जो men को मिलते हैं। उसके बाद कुछ laws इंट्रोड्यूस हुए थे, जिससे पोजीशन ऑफ वुमेन इम्प्रूव हुई थी सोसाइटी में, और उनका स्ट्रगल फिर भी कंटिन्यू रहा था कुछ पार्ट्स ऑफ वर्ल्ड में। और 1946 में फाइनली वुमेन जो फ्रांस की थी उन्हें राइट टू वोट मिला था। एंड दिस इज़ एन इम्पॉर्टेंट पॉइंट कि राइट टू वोट कब मिला? 1946 में। और किसको मिला? वुमेन को मिला। नाउ वी टॉक अबाउट एबॉलिशन of slavery in France. Abolition of slavery in France. In this part, we talk about there was a triangular slave trade था, उसका मतलब यूरोप, अमेरिका और अफ्रीका में स्लेव्स का ट्रेड चलता था। 18th सेंचुरी में देयर वाज बहुत कम क्रिटिसिज्म करते थे, बहुत लोग बहुत कम इस पे ध्यान देते थे स्लेवरी में फ्रांस में 18th सेंचुरी यानी 1700 से 1800 के बीच में। लेकिन और ना कोई लॉज पास हुआ था। बट इन 1794 एक ऐसा कन्वेंशन का ईयर था जिसमें सारे स्लेव्स को फ्री कर दिया गया था। तो मतलब 1794 एक इम्पोर्टेंट साल है स्लेव्स के लिए। बट फिर 10 साल बाद, ये तो रॉबेस्पियर ने स्लेवरी को हटाया था, 10 साल बाद वापस फिर नेपोलियन आया और उसने स्लेवरी को इंट्रोड्यूस कर दिया 1848 में। स्लेवरी से रिलेटेड 2 ईयर्स है, 1794 और 1848। फिर फाइनली 1848 में ही एबॉलिश हुई थी, लेकिन 10 साल बाद, इसके 10 साल बाद यानी 1894 में इंट्रोड्यूस हुई और 1848 में एबॉलिश हो गई। नाउ वी टॉक अबाउट द रिवॉल्यूशन जो रोज़ दिन भर की ज़िंदगी में होता था वहाँ पे, उसमें हम बात करेंगे द ईयर आफ्टर द 1789। उसके बाद बहुत सारे चेंजेस आए लाइव्स ऑफ मेन वुमेन और चिल्ड्रन में। द रिवॉल्यूशनरी गवर्नमेंट टुक इट अपॉन देमसेल्व्स टू पास लॉ दैट विल ट्रांसलेट द आइडियाज ऑफ लिबर्टी एंड इक्वालिटी इनटू एवरीडे प्रैक्टिसेस। गवर्नमेंट खुद से लॉज पास करती थी जो लोगों की भलाई के लिए थे, और एक इम्पॉर्टेंट लॉ जो इफेक्ट में आया वो था एबॉलिशन ऑफ सेंसरशिप। इट वॉज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट लॉ दैट वॉज एबॉलिशन of censorship, and the question also can come in our exam about abolition of censorship. So now the liberty ideas of liberty and democratic rights, these were the two important ideas which were the legacy of the French Revolution. So what was the legacy of French Revolution? Were the ideas of liberty and democratic rights. These were spread from France to the rest of the Europe in 19th century में, यानी 1800 to 1900 में ये आगे और देशों जो यूरोप थे उनमें भी पास हो गए थे ये आइडियाज़। उसके बाद हम बात करते हैं नेपोलियन की। अब नेपोलियन बोनापार्टे 1804 में डेथ मतलब हार गया था या एग्जीक्यूट हो गया था कह सकते हैं। 1804 नेपोलियन क्राउन नहीं सॉरी 1804 में उसने अपने आप को क्राउन करा था और खुद को अपना एम्परर बना लिया था फ्रांस का। उसके बाद ही सेट आउट टू कॉन्कर, वो नेबरिंग और यूरोपियन कंट्रीज़ को कॉन्कर करना चाहता था, डिपोजेस करना चाहता था, डायनेस्टीज़ को अलग अलग किंगडम बनाना चाहता था, अपने ही मेंबर्स हर जगह अपनी फैमिली के प्लेस करना चाहता था। तो इसको माना गया एज अ मॉडर्नाइजर ऑफ यूरोप। और लेकिन एक वाटरलू की वॉर में ये डिफीट हो गए थे 1815 में। तो 1815 में ये हार गया था और 1816 में इसकी डेथ हो गई थी और ये एज ए इम्प्रिजन था। तो दिस वॉज द होल चैप्टर which was all about French Revolution. I'll give the PDF in your description so you can read about the chapter. Thank you.